There are cars born to be loved, to be admired, to sit under showroom lights like jewelry of their era. And then there are cars born to be thrown into life, dragged through potholes, scraped by doors, blasted with salted snow, run 12 hours a shift like a sledgehammer that is never allowed to break. The Czech Marathon belongs to the second group. But what makes it strange, maybe even a little reactionary in the Detroit world, lies in a paradox that once spoken aloud is enough to make people look up. Let's start with the numbers. In the 1960s, a Chevy Bear was seen as a symbol of a prosperous, glossy, confident America. But the mechanical reality back then was far harsher than the ads. Making it to 100, without needing an engine rebuild was already an achievement. Yet in New York, right on roads chewed up by taxis and weather, checker marathons ran everywhere with odometers climbing to 1 million miles. 1 million miles! Not some parlor legend, but something taxi drivers and mechanics treated as just another day in the city. Put the two images side by side, and you'll see the contrast. A gleaming Cadillac, tail fins high like wings, chrome so bright it reflects the whole sky, was the fashion of that era. The Czech Marathon, on the other hand, is boxy like a crate, its face squared off like an industrial tool. No tail fins, no trying to look new, it came to work. At this point, the question is clear. How could a small automaker in Kalamazoo, Michigan, with a budget that was a grain of sand compared to GM, create a car that the big three, Ford, GM, Chrysler, couldn't kill? To understand why the Czech Marathon could endure for so long, we have to go back to where it all began. Not the showroom, but the fleet yard. And at the center of that story is someone very different from the glamorous image of auto tycoons, Maurice Markin. Maurice Markin wasn't a flashy car guy. He was practical. And that practicality was forged in a time when taxis in America's cities didn't compete only through service, but also through pressure and violence. The taxi wars of the 1920s weren't a fancy phrase. They were a survival context. From there, Checker formed a business model that ran against the current of Ford or Chrysler. While the big three sold a dream to retail customers, pushing the story of a new model every year into the buyer's psyche, Checker at first almost didn't care about retail buyers. The customers they targeted were fleet owners, people who looked at a car through operating numbers, how many hours it runs, how many times it breaks, whether parts are available, how long repairs take, and how many trips are lost every time the car goes down. Right here, Checker collided head-on with Detroit's dominant philosophy, planned obsolescence. The big three changed styling every year to make last year's car look outdated, pushing customers to buy new. One season, one look, 1 year, one shape. So that last year's car naturally became the past. But for taxis, everything is measured in uptime. So Checker chose a path many would call stubborn, keeping the design unchanged from 1958 to 1982. It may sound like sheer stubbornness, but for fleets, it was a gift because continuity produced the most valuable thing to a mechanic: the ability to swap parts across years, interchangeability. When a 1960 fender bolts onto a 1975 car perfectly, you don't just save on parts costs. You save time hunting for components, save labor hours, cut down time, and turn maintenance into a smooth, industrial-like process. While most cars of the same era chose a perimeter frame or began leaning toward unibody, these two approaches made cars lighter, smoother riding, and better suited to family use. But in return, under harsh working conditions, they were more prone to twisting when cornering hard, hopping curbs, or taking the not-at-all gentle impacts of urban taxi duty. Checker took a different road. They used an X-race frame, a heavy-duty X-frame. And this is the point that makes people in the trade nod. The X-frame forms a rigid spine and naturally anti-whist structure that keeps the body from wringing like a towel under lateral or torsional loads. In real taxi life, this isn't just about feel. It's why a checker that takes a hard side hit can still limp away, can still keep going. Then there's the suspension system. Checker didn't build a suspension for weekend cruising. They built a suspension to survive a shift. In the rear are extra-thick leaf springs, a choice that sounds crude, but is exactly right for the job. Leaf springs handle loads well, are durable, less sensitive, and fit a car that regularly hauls all kinds of passengers and luggage. Up front are arms reinforced specifically for New York potholes, meaning they didn't just bolt them on for show. They designed for the taxi's real operating environment. But there was an even more practical move, one that shows Checker understood the limits of a small company very clearly. The engine strategy. Checker didn't build their own engines because, for them, it was too risky. Building your own power plant means shouldering massive R&D costs, taking on the risk of design flaws, and maintaining a complex supply chain. While their goal was reliability and fast repairability, instead, they used a parts bin engineering strategy, leveraging the existing parts supply and taking the best of what others had already proven. Early on, it was the Continental Inline 6, an inline six-cylinder layout known for smoothness and that kind of durability. You can truly work hard. Later, they moved to something that was practically the common language of American mechanics, the Chevy Small Block 58 with 283, 327, 350 options. Just hearing those numbers, many older viewers can already hear the signature engine note of the Detroit era. And if you want one detail that shows Checker truly thought like a fleet operator, look at the rear axle. Dana 44. This isn't the kind of axle you put under a normal sedan if your goal is smoothness and economy. Dana 44 is what you typically see under Jeeps and pickup trucks, where load and durability come first. Overkill for a sedan? Yes. Necessary for a taxi? Absolutely. A taxi doesn't just carry people. It carries luggage. It carries the constant cycle of hard acceleration and hard braking. And an overbuilt rear axle is exactly what keeps the car from folding. Then there's the bodywork, where Checker made a choice that surprises a lot of people, because it sounds more like an industrial vehicle standard than a passenger car. 14-gauge steel armor. Standard automotive steel is usually 18 or 20 gauge. Checker used 14 gauge for the body panels. And you have to remember one important rule. The smaller the gauge number, the thicker the steel. Thicker steel means more weight and worse fuel economy, but in return, it takes scrapes and bumps better, and it's less prone to that one light hit and it wrinkles kind of denting. And to complete the mindset that the car has to get back on the road fast, Checker did something extremely trade true. Bolt-on panels. Bolt-on panels. All four fenders were bolted on, not welded in place. When a fender got dented, a mechanic could swap it out in 20 minutes without needing any cutting or welding equipment. Imagine the difference between 20 minutes and a drawn-out cut-weld paint process. For a taxi, that's an entire work shift that can be saved. This is the kind of thing retail customers rarely notice, but fleet owners and mechanics see it instantly. This car was designed to be repaired like a tool, not treated like a piece of jewelry. For passengers, Checker isn't the kind of thing that makes people gasp at a luxurious interior, but it feels like stepping into a space calculated around real-world needs rather than aesthetic taste. The jump seats turn the cabin into a place that can adapt flexibly when carrying extra people, especially in the situations urban taxis always face. A small group suddenly needing to ride together, or an airport run where the passenger isn't traveling alone. And then there's one very fit-for-purpose detail that anyone who climbed in and out of these cars back then will remember. A dead flat floor with no drive shaft hump bulging up high. For Checker, that wasn't just comfort for stretching your legs. It was real utility. The roomy space made it feel more like a living room than a typical sedan. In a city like New York, where a taxi has to serve everyone, from the elderly to people hauling bags to those who need mobility assistance, that spaciousness wasn't a small bonus. It was the reason the car was so useful and so trusted. And for the driver, the Czech Marathon is like a mobile office designed for a 12-hour shift. Practical, rough, unglamorous, but exactly what's needed. Everything is laid out to endure repetition. Get in, get out, turn around, brake, accelerate, stop at red lights, wait for a fare, and go again. The higher seating position provides better visibility, an advantage you can't dismiss in a crowded urban environment where you have to read traffic and pedestrians like reading music. When you're behind the wheel of a taxi, comfort isn't leather seats. Comfort is seeing clearly, operating easily, and feeling less worn out after hundreds of stop-and-go cycles. But then, the 1973 oil crisis hit every heavy car head-on, and Checker was one of the clearest examples. Its tank-like structure made it weigh nearly 2 tons, and when you haul nearly 2 tons of steel around the city all day, terrible fuel consumption stops being a rumor. Before that, people could accept trading fuel for durability. But after 1973, the economics flipped. Fuel became an obsession, and anything that guzzled gas got put under the operating cost microscope. Next, new late 1970s regulations on front bumpers and crash standards drove engineering costs through the roof. And for a small company, that's the kind of cost that can kill an entire production line, even if the product is still trusted. The Big Three could spread compliance costs across millions of cars, could swallow R&D with massive scale. But in Kalamazoo, Michigan, every major change was a deep cut into the company's ability to survive. And then the ending arrives like a quiet shot. In 1982, the last Checker left Kalamazoo, not because the car suddenly became bad, but because the world around it had changed the rules of the game. The era began demanding lighter, more fuel-efficient vehicles, faster compliance with new safety standards, and production at a scale a small company couldn't sustain. Looking back at the whole story, the Checker Marathon isn't the fastest, isn't the prettiest, and isn't the most modern, but it's honest. Born to work, not to be displayed, and precisely because it was fit for purpose, it became something rare in American automotive history. Its legacy lies in how every decision served durability and time back on the road. Keeping the design unchanged from 1958 to 1982, so interchangeability became an advantage. A 1960 fender fits a 1975 car perfectly. The X-Race frame resists twisting with extra thick rear leaf springs and AA arms reinforced for New York potholes. Parts bin engineering chose the Continental Inline 6, then the Chevy small block Variate 283 Bauer 3227 350 for easy repairs and easy sourcing. The Dana 44, meant for Jeeps and pickup trucks, was put under a sedan. The body used 14-gauge steel instead of the standard 18 or 20-gauge, and all 4 bolt-on fenders could be swapped in 20 minutes. None of it was meant to impress, but to survive until a 1 million odometer became something you could predict. Today, cars often feel like appliances. Checker once felt like a partner, less flashy, but durable and easy to maintain. The line, "They don't build cars like they used to," is sometimes just a cliché, but for this Kalamazoo taxi, it's a very specific technical truth. Have you ever ridden in this yellow tank? Share your memories below. If you value mechanical engineering more than fashion trends, hit like and subscribe for more videos that dissect automotive history. See you next time.